A warm welcome here in the Hebel Theater to the Berlinale Homage talk. This is not Willem Dafoe. Please welcome Rainer Rother, the Artistic Director of Deutsche Kinemathek and Director of Berlinale Retrospective. Warm welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I wonder if anybody could have mistaken me. Besides, something is lacking here. So, no, we are very proud to cooperate once again with the talents, to have a journey through time with the Homage guest, the one who got the Lifetime Achievement Award. And in preparing that, we were very proud to select films together with Willem. And we are looking forward now for this discussion, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. So you will have a good time, I'm sure.
Okay, please welcome Peter Cowie, a film historian here on stage, the moderator of today.
Thanks, guys. Great speech. Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon again. Today's guest, Willem Dafoe, is one of the most experienced and the most admired character actors in American cinema. He's acted in over 120 films. He's acted in all kinds of genres, whether it's Spider-Man or Shadow of the Vampire or Last Temptation of Christ. And he's worked with a stream of major directors: William Friedkin, Oliver Stone, Anthony Minghella, David Lynch, David Cronenberg. The list goes on and on and on. And this year he's received the third of his nominations for an Academy Award as Best Supporting Actor, this time for the Florida Project. And last night he received an Honorary Golden Bear in Berlin. So please welcome Willem Dafoe. So, Willem, this is not the first time you've acted in Berlin. Actually, you've been on stage in the area.
I have, yeah. In fact, a couple of times I performed at Hau 2, okay. Next door. Yeah. Hallische Ufer, I guess.
Yeah. The theme of this year's talents, we always have a theme. Last year it was Courage Against All Odds. This year it's Secrets. And I'm wondering if perhaps we can ask you to divulge one secret, and that is, how do you get inside each and every one of these hundreds of characters that you do? I mean, 2, 3, 4 films a year. How do you approach getting to know a character?
I think the secret, it's probably no secret. The secret would be that for each film, for each role, you have to reinvent your process, really. There's nothing consistent about how I approach it. The only thing that I notice is you have to do whatever it takes to have the authority to say, I am this person, to enter into a different set of impulses, a different set of thinking, a different way of physical moving, to sort of leave yourself behind and enter into a different way of being. And whatever you have to do to get there, you know,
Yeah.
in the context of what you're doing is what the process is. So sometimes it can be very superficial. It can be something like a costume that helps you get there.
Yeah.
Or it can be an accent, or it can be a way of looking, or some sort of personal attachment you have to, you know, the story. It's always different.
I think you said once that every character is in us, inside us.
I think so. I mean, you know, everyone here is capable to do all kinds of things. If you basically take the idea that who we are is something that we've created for ourselves, you know, just to survive the day to day. But what we're actually capable of is pretty infinite. All it takes is a will. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes when I feel like when you pretend to do something, when you play, when you're fooling around, you know, sometimes you can feel, even without looking or demonstrating outwardly, that you're another person. Sometimes you can enter by sheer will into being another person. I think we all have that capability.
Yeah. One of the clips we'll show later is from The Hunter, and there you were on screen virtually the whole time, and single-handedly had to carry the film. And there I would think you have to really flesh out the character almost as you go, almost as you shoot in a way.
You know what, for a film like that, I like it very much because I think I've been trained as a task-oriented actor. I really respond to doing things. I think of myself as a doer. I don't think so much about psychology. I think about applying myself to actions in a really engaged way. And then once you submit to actions, they take you to a place that you don't even know would happen. And that's where the emotion comes, because then you're projected into a place that you definitely have a reaction to, and that propels you to the next place, and the next place, and the next place.
Tracking back, I believe you had one of your very first roles in Heaven's Gate, but we never saw it. It ended up on the cutting room floor, right?
That's not true, Peter.
Okay.
If you look hard enough, I'm there. God, I look a little sick in that picture. Can we turn that around? No, Heaven's Gate it's an interesting story because Heaven's Gate, do you know that film? Okay. Heaven's Gate, and I'm free to talk about it because Heaven's Gate had its own problems. Well, I was working in the theater and someone encouraged me to go in about this movie, and I wasn't really soliciting work. I got a job, and they sent me there, and when I arrived there, I was only supposed to be there for a couple weeks because the whole shoot was supposed to last like 2 months. But Michael Cimino, who was making the movie, was working with the script and inventing things so much that by the first day, we fell a week behind in the schedule. It's true. And what was a 3-month shoot became an 8-month shoot. What was an $8 million budget became a $40 million budget. Well, that's just to set the scene. Okay, so I'm there. I've been there for 3 months. I've got a glorified extra job. It's a very small role, but as I say, he's inventing things, so I'm getting to do some interesting things. And one day, all day we're in a lighting setup, in full makeup and costume. We are not shooting. We're just testing the light. And it's a town meeting, and there's a group of us playing immigrants, and we're standing there for 8 hours in place. And Vilmos Zsigmond is lighting us, and it gets a little boring. And the woman next to me whispers a dirty joke in my ear. And I laugh a little too loud, Cimino, who's talking to people out here, hears the laugh. He turns around and he says, "Willem, step out." And everybody goes, and I was fired on the spot.
Okay.
End of story, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was my first job.
But then actually, in a way, your first breakthrough was with a film directed by the very young Kathryn Bigelow, The Loveless.
Right.
And that was followed quickly by Streets of Fire and To Live and Die in L.A. Were you afraid at that point that you might be typecast as a kind of ruthless villain? Or?
I think, yes. No, because in the beginning, when you're not like a leading man type, or you're not perceived that way anyway at that moment, you're basically perceived as a character actor. And the most interesting character actor parts are these heavies or these, villains. So I think that's where I started. And, I just wanted flexibility. I had no problem playing those kinds of roles. I enjoyed it. But I didn't want to be limited in what was offered to me. So I was concerned about it, and I did my best to mix it up.
Well, we have a clip from Platoon. Now, how did you get the role in Platoon?
Get the role is funny. Just like a lot of people, Oliver Stone wanted to get a group of young men together. And then from that group, he was going to figure out who played what part. So I didn't really audition for a particular part. We all just went there. He talked to us, told us what we were going to do. We read little. And then once we were this group, then he designated different roles, which is kind of interesting because that's not usually, usually they're casting you for a specific part.
Well, you stand for goodness in that film in a way, and Berenger stands for badness. And the clip we're going to see will show where you're running through the jungle, and then he tracks you down, and there's this terrible moment when you exchange looks, and then he shoots you. So Can we have the first clip, please? We can see it. You've been very loyal to your directors. You tend to go back to them again and again. I'm thinking of Paul Schrader, for example, Wes Anderson doing voices.
Abel Ferrara.
Abel Ferrara, that's right. We have a clip from Pasolini later. And Martin Scorsese has been one of those. You were in The Aviator, and of course, perhaps the biggest challenge for any actor, any role, is playing Jesus Christ on screen. Now, how did you prepare for that one?
I didn't. No, I'm joking, but the truth was that, you don't prepare for it, really. It was a reactive role, and I wasn't playing the Jesus Christ. I was playing our Jesus Christ. The Jesus Christ of the Kazantzakis adaptation. So I didn't have the pressure to explain the Jesus. I was inhabiting this Jesus. And a big key was Martin Scorsese. He didn't tell me to do any preparation at all, really, except look at Pasolini's Gospel According to Matthew, to give a feeling for what he was trying to accomplish as far as showing the human side of Jesus, showing him as a man. So I'm a man, and I thought really the most important thing was to cleanse myself of any expectations, really get rid of any pressure or any. It's a reactive role, so I had to just be present and not expect anything, and then have these things work on me. And the movie's built like that. The story's built like that, because here's a guy that just wants to skate through life, and then all of a sudden people are requiring these extraordinary things from him, and these extraordinary things are happening to him. So basically, I tried to let that happen.
And you were not too disguised. You were recognizably Willem Dafoe, and I mean, he deliberately did that. He wanted you to be a realistic person, right, as if you were alive today.
Right, right.
I had that feeling. Could we see the next clip, please, which is from... Ouch.
That clip kind of made a liar out of me. He's not so reactive, is he? I think someone had to talk him to him by that time.
Rejection at Nazareth. That's right. That was the chapter heading. Rejection at Nazareth. Yeah. I think one of your most successful roles is the one of the FBI agent in Alan Parker's Mississippi Burning, because the cliche image of an FBI agent or a CIA agent is someone who has FBI on the back of their uniform and they run around with guns and shoot down doors and all that kind of thing. Instead, here was a man who was almost like Jean-Louis Trintignant in Z. He was quiet but authoritative underneath, wearing spectacles, grey suit, and that was I guess that was a part where you didn't have much room to maneuver. You had to be very restrained all the way.
You know, I read the script and I thought it was an interesting story. It's an interesting part of American history, a dark part, a dark chapter. I wanted to work with Alan Parker. I wanted to work with Gene Hackman. I wasn't looking at the role so much. I thought, good, I'll be on this movie. I'll support Gene Hackman. That's my job. And that's what I did. But the truth is, the role ended up being much better than I thought it was. The actor in me said, okay, it's a little flat on the page. There's not, but I like this project, so I want to be part of it. So I entered it, and in the end, I think it was more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
What was it like working with Gene Hackman? Because he's such a physical actor.
Yeah, but so am I. No, he was in a good place. He's a very strong personality. He does not suffer fools, but he was kind to me, and yeah, we got along.
Okay. So,
you know what he didn't like? I like doing stunts and things, but it's only the stuff with my body. Things like driving cars and all that. If they can't see who it is, I'd rather have someone do it if they have a special skill. Well, Gene kind of prides himself on being a little bit of a hot rodder, or he did. And there were huge sequences where I had to drive and he had to sit there. Oh, man. He gave me a lot of grief. Yeah.
Okay, could we see the clip from Mississippi Burning, please? We talked backstage a bit about your stage work and how important that is to you. Could you tell us about the Wooster Group, how it started, and the high points, really?
Sure. It's hard because it's a big story. It's a big story for me because the Wooster Group, time with the Wooster Group really formed my thoughts about performing and how I work. It did a lot because I was with this company that's based in New York. It still exists, even though I don't work with them anymore. A company that made their own work, and we toured a lot. We toured a lot in Germany, actually, too. And I think it was a true company, and we were working every day at the place. We ran our own place. We made our pieces. We'd work during the day and often show things in progress at night when we weren't touring. So it was really full on, and that was my life. And then people saw me at the theater and started asking if I wanted to make movies. So then that new chapter in my life started, but I continued to be at the Wooster Group every day. But it really shaped this idea of being a task-oriented actor. Also, really actor as maker, actor as artist, not as an interpreter, but an embodier and someone that does things. That's what I mean by task-oriented. That was important. Also, it had a very strong director, but it was technically a collective, so hierarchies were discouraged, and the actors were like technicians, and the technicians were like actors in the sense that sometimes they were interchangeable because a lot of the technology we used was very visible. It was not hidden. So often part of performing was actors helping with the mechanics of the scenery or whatever, props. It was a very practical, sometimes almost Brechtian, clearly you could see what was going on. I don't know where to start. We used technology at a very early stage when a lot of theaters weren't using technology and integrating it in a practical way, not just as a tool to make backdrops, but in a practical way. Like, for example, we did a Three Sisters, a version of the Three Sisters, and at one point there was a 90-year-old woman that was doing one of the parts, and she couldn't come all the time because she wasn't strong enough to be performing all the time. So we taped her. So sometimes we would roll out a TV when she couldn't be there, and we'd do the scene with her on TV. Now, it sounds like that's an aesthetic idea. No, we were a poor theater company. It was the only solution, So I only tell that as that's kind of how an aesthetic was formed, out of practicality. And that was also a period where, for example, the Wooster Group was a group of people that we found a space and made a home, and we worked every day, and none of us were really trained. There was architect, dancer, musician, drawer, all these people, but we were making theater, so it was interesting. At that time in New York, there were a lot of people just making work, even though they weren't trained for it. It was kind of an amateur aesthetic, amateur in the best sense, the sense that we were doing it for personal reasons and because we loved it, not because we thought it was even going to be a career. We did every show as if it was going to be our last show.
What's so good, I think, is that as your film career gathered momentum, you still continued, obviously not working at the same intensity with Wooster Group, but you continued to act with them. I saw you on stage in Paris, I think at Transatlantic, about 10, 12 years ago.
Yep.
And yet, at that particular year, you probably made 3 or 4 films.
Yeah, the two started to, at a certain point, they fed each other, and then at another point, it became difficult because we were always working. So anytime I'd go off and make a movie, okay, I could bring back resources, I could bring back money after I came back, but when I was gone, and it would take me out of the process. So then to re-enter that process became kind of inorganic. So they could put placeholders for me and they could structure things so I could come and go, but it kind of went against everything the way that we were working, so it became more and more difficult.
But you clearly like stage acting, and it
I do,
fulfills
and I
you.
still perform. I've been working, since the Wooster Group, I've worked with Richard Foreman and Bob Wilson a couple of times, and right now I'm working with Romeo Costellucci. So I continue, but it's not quite the same as having a company day to day.
Is there a basic difference in the technique, or is it exactly the same? In front
It's
of
just
a
like
camera,
movies. Each time it changes. Time it changes. I mean, yeah, it's all pretending. It's all pretending, and it's all doing things, and it's all practical.
Yeah.
I've said it often, but it's really true. Sometimes I feel more like a dancer or an athlete than an actor, because so much associated with acting I don't relate to, in terms of the approach of interpreting a text and the psychology and the way you build a character. I don't think about those things. Not because I have it's just not my way. It's not what comes naturally to me, and it's not what attracts me.
Well, unlike many of your generation, I'm thinking of someone like Tom Berenger, you have actually strayed out into the wider world beyond the United States, and you've acted a lot in Europe. The next clip comes from The English Patient, in which you had a very unusual role, playing a character called Caravaggio. Have you noticed a difference when you've worked with Angelopoulos or Von Trier or Anthony Minghella, a difference between mainstream Hollywood and that kind of filmmaking?
I think there's author cinema and there's industry cinema. Sometimes they can overlap, sometimes they can be both, but I think that's the big distinction. And author cinema tends to be, tends to be found more in the independent world, and in other places in South America, in Europe, in Asia. That's where I've found these opportunities, even in Australia.
Tasmania.
Tasmania. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have a clip from The English Patient, made in 1996. Could we have that clip, please? How many takes did that take to do that? Was it a tough?
I don't remember.
You mentioned
Not long.
You mentioned that you love doing tasks, actually, and curiously enough, that was the thing that struck me about The Hunter, the film you made in Australia, where you have to set traps for animals, and you do that very meticulously. Did they have a sort of wrangler for traps? Who?
I worked with a survivalist, one of these guys that has the capability of going out into the bush with nothing. I mean, basically a knife, some wire, really in a bag this big. And he lives for a year, just catching his own food and making his own shelter and all that sort of thing. So I worked with him, and it was beautiful to see him make these traps, and beautiful to see how he, dealt with his food and animals and all that. So I practiced that very hard, because I find that if you learn something very concrete when you're approaching a character, you have a shift of understanding. And with that shift of understanding, you apply that to, it opens the door to be this other person, because you're really reborn through knowledge, sort of, or through a passion or an understanding. So you look for those things that leave you behind and create a new person. And when it's concrete like that, it's nice, because it's like factual, it's authentic, it's organic, and you're not driving, something else is driving. The nature of things is driving, truth is driving, in the best circumstances. So when you have very strong things to learn, it liberates you.
And what about the script made you take the decision to go virtually to the bottom of the world, to Tasmania, spend presumably many weeks there on location?
Yes, and you can never tell the temperature or smells or that sort of thing on a movie, really, but it was not easy. But let's put it this way. When I read the script, the fact that they were shooting in Tasmania made all the difference in the world. It rooted it. If you would have been shooting in a park somewhere, or in the wilderness in North America or something, it wouldn't have made sense. But the fact that I was going to shoot in Tasmania proposed an adventure for me, and that would be a life experience that could inform the fiction. Sure. So I'm on board for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Because when you approach projects, it's really about people, places, and things.
You had to believe in the director.
Yeah, the director is very important.
Yeah. You've never been
Did
drawn...
I say something obvious? No, listen, I say that only because a lot of actors, really, they concentrate on the role and the script. But I think director's more toward the top for me. You want someone good watching you.
Could we see the next clip, please, which is from The Hunter in the film made in Tasmania?
Did anyone have an association go back to the scene in Platoon?
Maybe.
He sets down, look, he's looking, he eyes the thing that he's going to shoot. Then he considers, then he goes up again and shoots.
Yeah, that's right.
And the Tasmanian tiger lowers his head much the same way that, in acceptance, much the same way Elias smiles. I just noticed that now.
That's right. It also shows compassion. your compassion. For the first time in the film, actually, because you play a very tough character in a way. You're a hunter who's paid, like a bounty hunter, to track down this legendary Tasmanian tiger for a consortium. And I think at the moment you do it, you obviously feel that you've destroyed something magical.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you finished a film like that, and you go back to the States, did you ever see the film before it opened? Does the director keep up with you afterwards and say, would you like to?
It depends on the film. That one, I can't remember. They usually check in with you. It really depends.
A little earlier, you mentioned Abel Ferrara as one of your favorite directors. He's a man who specializes in outsiders, in idiosyncratic characters, and I think you like to play that kind of character.
I think that's where the most interesting stories often come from. That challenge our way of thinking and challenge what our normal. A lot of stories support our normal, comfort us, help us feel good by reinforcing what we already know. But sometimes when you go to experience the lives of people that don't have the same kind of comfort or the same kind of point of view that we do, I get turned on by that.
Well, Pier Paolo Pasolini, who you portray in Abel's film Pasolini, was definitely an outsider in the Italian cinema. If you're asked to name the great directors, you do, but then you think, oh yes, and also there was Pasolini, because he was different. He was a man of the theater, he was a poet, and you had to get inside his skin, particularly for this fight. We have a clip from the final interview that he gave.
Okay, yes.
Which cinematically is nothing special, but what you're saying is very interesting, I think.
Oh, he was very prescient in the things that he talked about, and I think there's some of his beautiful original thinking in this clip, if it's what I think it is.
And did you feel did you identify with him?
Very well. Yes, I mean, when you're young and you read something that opens you up to a new way of thinking, Pasolini had that kind of power. He really was a brilliant thinker, and he was his own person. And in terms of everything from sexuality to politics to aesthetics, he was always surprising. You could never nail him down. He was always thinking, and he was a very passionate, articulate, erudite guy, but an intellectual. He was so many things. An intellectual who knew some of the great artists and writers of Italy of the time, but at the same time, he said he found the company of people with less than a fourth grade education his preferred people. He loved people, simple people that weren't yet corrupted. He often had, I don't want to interpret his stuff because he's a very complicated guy, but I really responded to his idea of the corruption of socialization, capitalism, what do you call it, materialism. He was a real deeply iconoclastic and original thinker.
And of course, quarter of a century earlier, you just told us you'd seen Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Yes, yes.
So that was probably one of the first times you really came close to...
in the meantime, between Last Temptation and doing Pasolini, I certainly became more familiar with his work. But one of the beauties of working on a character like Pasolini is you've got a wealth of information. He wrote beautiful critical essays. You've got his film work, you've got plays, you've got novels, you've got letters, you've got... And we had the cooperation of close friends of his. Ninetto Davoli was in the film, and he was his great muse. He was in the film. He gave me his clothes to wear, Pasolini's clothes to wear, because we were basically the same size. The family was very supportive of the project, and we were shooting in a lot of the real places of the story. So it was a beautiful experience. It was a little scrappy low-budget movie, but I think it really captured something Pasolinian.
Pasolinian, yes. Well, we have a short clip from the last interview he gives to a journalist. So could we have that, please? Good. It's a good clip. That was a great clip, actually. That was a great clip, I think, to show some of his thinking. You've been nominated for the third time for Florida Project, which hasn't opened wide in Europe yet. And for those who don't know it, Florida Project was the original name for Disneyland Florida. And you play a motel manager, and you have to deal with a family that's come, a rather dysfunctional family, and it showed a new side of you, a side that could work with children, I think, very well. Do you like working with children and in movies?
Not particularly.
Okay.
They're people too.
Okay.
I have children. I had children. They've grown up.
Yeah.
Now I have a grandchild. No, I'm joking. I've worked with children before.
Yeah.
In The Hunter, I worked with children. It wasn't just children. It was working in a real place. I really, the approach, the way we shot the Florida project was really like an old neo-realist movie. We were shooting in the real place, telling a story of the people that were there. I was one of the few actors. It was mostly children and people that hadn't performed before. It was low budget, beautiful script, small crew, and it's the story of people who don't have a home that are living in these budget motels temporarily, long-term. So basically you have a lot of single mothers with their children living in one room, sleeping all in the same bed. They have to develop strategies to find ways to survive, to pay the $36 a night that they have to pay for the room. It's no way to get ahead. It's a deep cycle of poverty. And the story really is, you see this motel as a little world, as a little community, as a little nation. And as the manager, I have to keep the peace, which is pretty challenging, because I'm not that different from those people. So I cut them slack. I give, I'm not too hard with the law, but if I let them play me, then I lose my power, and I lose my job, and then I do become them,
You don't rant and rave.
No, because I know these people. I know with each scene I have to kind of figure out a strategy that's appropriate to, solve the problem. Because what's beautiful is this about this character is he's a very simple man, and all he wants to do is keep the peace, which doesn't sound like a very dramatic thing, but it's pretty cool because you see how he has to negotiate situations, and that somewhere deeply he's like a good man in the respect that he just wants to make things better. He understands the law of interdependence. He understands that the people that he's working with, their happiness depends on him and his happiness depends on them. He understands that deeply, but he doesn't know that. It's just that's expressed through his actions.
Okay, could we see the clip from Florida Project, please? That's a short one. So just before we open it for questions to the audience, since then, as befits your rhythm, you seem to have done about 10 films, but you've worked on one about Van Gogh, and that was in a way like Jesus Christ. It's a role that's been done by many other people before. How did you approach that? Can you give us a sneak?
It's a film called At Eternity's Gate. We finished shooting around Christmas. We shot in France. It's basically Van Gogh at the end of his life. It's not a biopic. It's a film about nature, about painting, about making things, about Van Gogh. It's directed by Julian Schnabel. There's a lot of painting in the movie.
Did you shoot in
Go
Arles?
see it. It's going to be really, really fun.
And that was shot in...
I think it'll be a beautiful film. When it comes out and you see it, yeah, he was right. Or no, he was totally off.
And that was shot in France, right? On location. It was shot on location.
Yeah,
right?
all in locations. We shot in Arles, and we shot as much in the actual locations, which again, for me, helps so much. It's like flirting with ghosts. You have that ground that he walked on your side. I mean, to shoot at Saint-Rémy, one of these asylums, it's preserved. It's a museum, and one part of it still functions as a hospital. It's moving, and it's moving only because it's easier to imagine.
Of course, one of your earlier mentors, Martin Scorsese, played Van Gogh for Kurosawa.
I know.
In Dreams.
I know.
Did he give you any tips?
I know that.
No. Okay, it's time for questions. We have a system here whereby we have microphones around, upstairs and down. Catch my attention first. I'll try and get as many of you as I can. But when I do say that it's you, wait for the mic, please. So I'm seeing someone right at the back there with his hand right up in the middle. Yeah, that's right. Keep waving. That's right. Thank you.
You said the director is very important. Here I am.
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Great to speak to you. So I'm sure you experienced every style of directing there is, from encouragement to torture. At least Lars von Trier must have been torture, I would assume.
It was
from his
pure
reputation.
encouragement.
Wonderful. So what got the best out of you?
What brings the best out of me?
Yes.
Encouragement.
The best performance, not the nicest
I think, okay.
behavior.
I think it's a hard question, and I'll try to give a good answer.
Thank you.
But I think the one thing that occurs to me is when a director creates a world, and even better, when he invites you or her, he or her, to create a world that is so complete that when you enter it, there's a logic to it. You don't even have to think. It becomes so clear. The world points you to the way of what has to be done. That's a great director. I think people think, particularly in terms of directors, that I think there's this or at least in my experience, there's this misunderstanding that a director, an actor's director calls the actor aside and says, okay, now in this scene, I want you to really, they talk about effect and emotions and what has to be accomplished. I've never experienced that. I never experienced that. It's all sort of practical and keeping you on track. Maybe that says something about me, maybe it doesn't. But I think there's a myth about, that kind of working through the beats and things. When you're shooting on a film, you're usually, kind of flying through things. You're discovering things, and you're trying to capture moments. So I'd say the best directors make the world, and invite you into it in a good way.
Do you have a question upstairs? Anybody there at the back? Yeah, yeah, right. Okay.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Where are you?
Up
Right
here,
up the
Red
first
Hat.
balcony, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Have you ever adapted any character traits to your real life, like or unintentionally?
Like what?
Have you ever adapted any character traits to your real life? Not like you were woken up and thought you were Jesus, but more like you've done some specific things.
Certain things stay with you. It's like, I've learned to speak Italian a little bit, and I start to gesture more than I used to, in a different way. And it's not that I want that; it kind of happens, So similarly, I think you do hang on to some things because sometimes certain muscles get exercised when you do a film that, you like that muscle and you keep it. But Yeah, it works the other way too. Sometimes you let it go flabby.
Another question down here. Yes? Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
2 years ago, I know that you had a workshop for Venice Film Festival. So I wanted to ask you if you plan
It was
to...
actually for the Biennale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Theater Biennale, huh?
Yes. And that's why I wanted to ask you, do you plan to have another workshop soon, somewhere, someday? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't plan. I mean, I don't have a plan right now. But I will say, and I'm not a teacher, but I had a great time the 2 times I've taught. I mean, taught a workshop. Because I have nothing to teach. I mean, as far as a plan, I'm not being falsely modest. I don't have a plan or a method because I'm always adapting it. But what I really loved was being in a room with people and, you know, doing basically call and response, having them do things, react, give them obstacles, play with them. A big job was stripping them of bad habits and too many
Tics.
presuppositions, you know. But I liked it a great deal, working with actors, because it was fun for me. It stimulated me. It was a very concrete way to kind of see what celebrates that thing that we all love in performing, that the life and the kind of beauty of whatever it is that we like to see when we watch people or live our lives.
Another one upstairs. Anyone upstairs? No? One? Okay, there's one. Okay. Then we'll come back down.
Hi, thank you very much for this wonderful talk.
Okay.
And can you say something about your time working with the great late Spalding Gray?
Yeah.
And how do you think he influenced you? And what
Where
did
are
he
you?
taught you in the
balcony.
Okay.
while you were working with the Wooster Group?
What was the last part? I'm sorry.
No, only about those the influence of Spalding Gray on your performing.
Spalding, you know, he was part of the company. He was an important part of the company. He really pioneered this kind of very well. Spalding and Liz together really pioneered this idea of telling your story in a very personal way. That's where his monologue career really came out of, that they worked together creating this character, Spalding Gray, and he basically used his own life as material. That's where it started. So that had a huge influence on me, the idea of using your own life as material. I never practiced that. I never really used that. That was really his work. But it was a beautiful thing to see. I mean, it did show me how you can marry your life and your work in a very positive way and make them kind of integrated, so they help each other. And that was the life of that group. I mean, I lived with the director. We worked every day. We were in each other's company. I mean, the company, it was a very incestuous and kind of all-in situation. And that was, that's kind of what you do with a film every time, or with when you tour, you know, when you go with Bob Wilson and you make a piece and you tour around the world and you get close with these people. So that was one thing. Also, I remember the first time that before I started working with the Wooster Group, I worked with the Performance Group briefly, which is the group that the Wooster Group grew out of. And we were doing a more conventional play. And I remember that we got there the first day, and I knew all my dialogue. I was ready to go. I was a young kid. I was the youngest one in the whole company. And I knew all my dialogue. I was ready to go. I had an idea of what to do, and I was like this Midwestern kid that was going to do good, you know? And they were so laid back. They were lazy. They didn't know their lines, you know? I thought, fuck, these people have no discipline whatsoever. But they were great. Take your time, find your way, don't force things. You know, let stuff happen. I guess that's a big lesson from the Wooster Group.
Another question down here, there, gentleman there. Oh, okay. Right behind, right, put your hand up again, okay. There you go.
Oh, thank you.
It's like the hot potato. I don't want it. Do you want it?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
My question is about Wes Anderson, since
Okay.
you're one of the guys who's worked with him a number of times,
Yes.
and since his movies are so special.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if he also had a very special directing style that separates him from other directors.
He sees things in such a precise way. He's maybe the most precise director I've ever worked with. But having said that, I worked with him on an animation, then on 2 movies. And in the first one, Life Aquatic, he was much looser. He had a very good script, actually, it was a good script, but I mean, it was a little loose. And then we'd get there every day, and he'd basically block out the main scene, and then he'd start to fold in all these elements. So that was like being with him, making something up on the day. It was much different in Grand Budapest Hotel. At the beginning of Grand Budapest Hotel, he showed me a animated, what do you call it, storyboard. Animated storyboard with stick figures where he did all the voices. It was fantastic. I turned to him and said, Wes, pocket the budget and just release this. It was a great movie. And it's interesting because he was so happy that I liked it and that I was excited. That was a joke, but that I was excited to do it because it was so clear to me. It's interesting that some actors didn't even want to look at it because they didn't want to see it. They had to find it themselves. I only mention it because I mean, I guess I'm saying something about me as well. I loved his precision because if you're given precise instructions of what he wants, you have something very clear to commit to. And the way you commit to it, the way you do it, you can do it with deeper grace and deeper commitment than you could if you're expending some energy trying to figure out what to do. It's like having a good score, and the fun is how you play it, you know? It's not about notes, it's about playing it, you know? So that was pretty cool. Very, very precise. Which made me also think of, if you know Teo Angelopoulos, he showed me how to do that when I worked with him on a movie, and he showed me how to do everything. And I loved it. It didn't rob any pleasure at all from me.
Okay, another question. Someone over here, I haven't been over here, at the back, with standing up. Yes, that's right.
Was there any particular role in your career that you felt like it was failure while you were playing it, while you were doing it, and then it turned out very well in the film?
Not so much. The other way around, maybe. No, I mean, I'm being a wise ass. I can't think of one. I can't, really.
But very often when you, particularly as a supporting actor, you might be involved for just 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then this film takes 3 or 4 months to do, and you don't see it until it actually comes out. That probably is very different to what you had anticipated.
That happens, yeah. But that's okay. I mean, what I try to do, you know, your involvement is different with each film. Some you're very much a collaborator. Sometimes you're, you know, hired to do a certain function. And I can work both ways, and I like both ways for different reasons. So yeah, sometimes I'm surprised by what I see. That's kind of related to your question. But also, my memory is bad, you know, when you're when you feel insecure, when you think things aren't working, you're just looking for solutions. So you never sit in it that very long. So I don't really remember films. Certainly, I've hit some films where I've been more concerned than others, more confident than others. But basically, that doesn't always last because it can't. Because you've got to develop a strategy to find out, to be confident and free. And if you get stuck or you feel like you're failing, you got to find something, even if it's to embrace that failure. Really fail. You know, I sometimes I think, really try to fail, really try to do bad. It's hard. It's hard. It really is.
No, I'm down here in the front. I have not been to the front yet. So here, this lady, right here, with her hand up.
What's up?
So you said before that one of the main things when you choose like a project to work on is the director you're going to work with. And you're married to an Italian woman, you live in Rome. So my question is there a contemporary Italian film director that you would like to work with?
Sure.
Who?
Her. And others. I get a little self-conscious dropping names, but certainly, you know, just who you'd think, the ones that are making good movies, and the ones that I don't know, probably. But whenever I see a movie that I like, I tend to follow the director and see what they're doing next. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, you know, certainly I've followed and I'm friendly with Sorrentino and, you know, Garone, and, you know, the obvious people because they've made some beautiful movies. And they live near me.
Do directors in Europe approach you personally more than in Hollywood, where scripts are likely to come through your agent and so on? Is it more personal here?
In America, sometimes they try to get to me directly, too. Particularly in Italy, they try to contact you directly. Okay. Yeah. It depends, country by country.
So you change your phone
different.
number every week?
Oh, no, I bring it on. I know how to say no.
Okay. Another one there, right in the middle. I have someone with a red, yeah. Keep waving. That's right. One is waving. That's right. There he is, right in the middle. You get a mic? It's coming to you. Okay.
Hello. Just wanted to say first that I love you.
That's sweet. What did I do to deserve this?
Well, as I was a kid, I would
Was it the flowers?
I would watch Spider-Man over and over again, and I've loved you ever since.
What's your relationship with your father like?
Anyway, I guess I just wanted to ask about that movie, obviously.
Okay.
You spoke before about how you worked on movies that have had, very, very low budgets, but did you ever feel sort of hesitant to take on that role for like a big studio movie, or did you just like the project and want to get involved?
I liked all those things. And, you know, I'm aware of the budget because it tells you kind of how business is going to be dealt, you know, how the film's going to be shot. It, you know, kind of dictates what the aesthetics are. But no, I was totally into that. And I was really, you got to remember, when Spider-Man was made, the first one, it wasn't a regular thing, these comic book adaptations, you know? It was sort of a risky thing, and it was a big budget movie. But I knew it was a personal film for Sam Raimi, and I was a fan of Sam Raimi, and I liked the double role, I liked the physicality of it, I liked the fact that it mixed humor and drama so effortlessly, it goes back and forth. That was a really good experience, and I had no hesitation about doing that film. It was a good experience.
One more question. Time for one more question. I'm going to just go like this and then... Okay, there. Somewhere there. No. No one there. Okay, yes. Okay, okay. There. Second in from... That's right. Yeah, right there. Yeah. Sorry to the others.
Hello. Question I wanted to ask is, since you're such a prolific actor and you've worked on everything from big budget blockbusters to like really small budget independent films, have you ever felt that there are some films that you did that have sort of fell through the cracks a little bit, that haven't gotten the recognition that they maybe deserve?
No, there's some films that I love that just don't get seen enough. And sometimes it's a business thing of how they're funded, particularly on smaller ones. You know, someone finances it in an unconventional way, for example, and then it plays some film festivals, and then to get it out there, they have to commit more money, and they've had their fun, they've had their adventure in the movie business, and they just don't want to take any more risks, so the film kind of sits there. That's happened a couple of times, and it breaks your heart because it's a movie, but to get it out there is what's costly now. To get it out there, distribution is tough on small films. So a lot of small films just don't get seen. And you say, oh, well, there's all these platforms where you can just get it on there and people will dial it up. No, that's very competitive now. So, yes, there are some beautiful films that I feel bad don't get out there, but, you know, that's life.
Have you ever been tempted to become a producer to control that aspect and try and...
No, I've got my hands full. I mean, I like performing. I like to be a little irresponsible. I mean, I'm responsible in the sphere of my responsibilities. But, you know, I to be a director would not be fun for me. Yeah.
Well, and we know that you had a busy night last night, probably a late night last night, and we know you've got another engagement tonight, and you've been wonderful to come down and spend time with us. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thanks.